Abigail Werner was shot in the chest by a 6-year-old student in her classroom on January 6th. The truly terrible thing about this is that administration was warned 4 times that day that this child was going to pose a threat. The first time was when Abigail told the school that the child was trying to fight with another student. Then again, Abigail said she had reason to believe that there was a gun in the student's pocket. Then later that day, another child came up to a teacher saying that they were told by this child who shot Abigail they had a gun, and if the child told anyone, this child who shot Abigail would also shoot them. And then again at the end of the day, another teacher requested to search this child's bag, and they were told no because it was almost the end of the day to let it go. After Abigail was shot, she got all of the other kids out of the room, and another teacher had to come in and restrain the child.
Here are some real Chuck E. Cheese ghost stories. I was excited for the new Chuck E. Cheese down the street to open. The location took up an old restaurant my grandma used to take me to growing up. My birthday was coming up, and I wanted to be the first one of my class to have my party there. We were having a great time, and this random boy came to play some games with us. I remember playing the clown game with him. He looked a little strange. His clothes were a little dirty, but he was nice. When it was time to eat, we invited him over, but he disappeared. It was weird, but I didn't think anything of it. When it was time to leave, my parents were pulling out of the parking lot, and I saw him staring at me through the window. I had a really weird feeling, and for some reason, I never wanted to go back. That is so scary. Like, where did he go? And why was he staring at him through the window? Here's another one. When I was 16, I was a custodian at my local Chuck E. Cheese. It was a pretty gross job cleaning all of the crap out of the playground area, but overall it was pretty lax. One day I was inside the playing area and heard a crawling noise, like a child was in there with me. A little girl came around the corner asking me where her mom was. Sometimes kids would hide here after closing, and I thought it was one of those situations. I told her I would call her mom for her, but when I got out of the playroom, there was no trace of her. I looked everywhere and never saw her again. I worked there for 3 months after that and never had an experience with her ever again. It was one of my first ghost experiences, and it will stay with me forever. I would have quit. That is so scary. Okay, last one. I was a manager at a Chuck E. Cheese. Whenever I would open the restaurant, I would get there a little earlier than my employees. I'd make sure the stage/party areas were looking good, and that is where this story takes place. The animatronic Chucky was always scary, but I never thought anything of it. But this time, I felt like someone was there with me. I looked at the animatronic, and I swear on my life till this day, I watched it turn on and move on its own. This happened to me a few times working there, and it always terrified me. My employees would sometimes report the same thing happening at closing time when no one else was there. No wonder why Five Nights at Freddy's exists. Have you ever had a haunting experience at Chuck E. Cheese? Let me know in the comments.
Spooky story time. A follower named Chanel sent me the story all the way from Trinidad, and we're gonna call it The Boy. Chanel says that this happened a few years ago, but she was working as a bartender. She worked the night shift, but she would normally be home at about 3 a.m. She says that her mom and her 3-year-old little brother were visiting from the United States in Trinidad, so she gave them her bedroom. She says that in her culture, they say that if you get home past midnight, to enter your home walking backwards. That way, if there's anything negative or anything evil, it won't follow you inside. She says that this specific night, she failed to do that because she was so tired, so she just went right inside. So she went right on inside, took a shower, called her boyfriend, got comfortable, lay down to get ready for bed, and she closes her eyes to start praying. In that moment, she hears her little brother crying. She opens her eyes, she sits up, and she sees him standing at the foot of her mattress. She calls out to him. He stops crying, and then he slowly starts walking backwards, like walking away from her. She gets up, starts talking to him, starts walking towards him, trying to calm him down, like, hey baby, are you okay? Whatever. He stops crying, and in that moment, she hears her mom say, Chanel, who are you talking to? She turns around and yells, I'm talking to Nicholas, Mom. He was standing right here by my bed and he was crying. And then Mom says, what are you talking about? He's asleep right next to me. Chanel turns around to look at that little boy, and he literally is backing away, and he walks through the closed bedroom door. Hell nah. She said that this was the one and only time that she saw anything like this. She's obviously seen and witnessed some paranormals, some spirits and shit, but nothing like this. Do you think it's because she didn't walk inside her home backwards? What do you guys think? Thank you so much to Chanel for sending me this spooky story. If you guys have any other stories that you'd like for me to read, please send them via DM or email, and I'd love to read them. And I will see you guys in the next spooky story. Bye!
This is why smuggling drugs or getting involved in any type of illegal activity is not worth it at all, because it can cost the rest of your entire life. LMA Cully, she's a British teenager. She's 18 years old and she's from Billingham on Teesside. She was studying in the UK to become a nurse, traveling, and she went to the Philippines. She started posting on TikTok as any young person on vacation, on holiday would do. But then one day she stopped posting on her TikTok and on her social media, and she stopped replying to her family and friends. When her family were not able to get in contact with her, that's when they reported her missing. Neil, her dad, and her auntie then got on a plane and flew all the way to Bangkok to try and find her and figure out what has happened to her. They found out that Bella was not in Thailand, but she was 4,000 miles away in Georgia, where she was arrested on alleged substance smuggling. Luggage inspection found 12 kg of marijuana and 2 kg of hash found in her travel bag, and they are trying to investigate whether she was trying to hand these substances over to somebody else. These types of crimes, they do not take lightly. They take this very, very seriously in these types of countries. I am talking about life in prison seriousness. The prison she's been held in is known to be very horrific, with alleged sewage-filled cells and cells so cramped with more than 3 people being rammed inside them. In this same prison in 2006, 7 prisoners were killed and 17 were injured by the prison guards. However, saying this, Miss Cully's lawyer has spoken out and said that she was in good health, but he would not describe her as an adequate adult. But her lawyer does not speak English, and they have been communicating through a translator. There was a pre-trial hearing on the 13th of May where Miss Cully told the court that she was pregnant. Right now, she's still being detained, and apparently there's a lot more different groups of people who are actually involved in this whole operation. This is a quote from a spokesperson saying, "The arrest was a result of a joint operation between multiple departments, and if she was found guilty, Miss Cully could face up to 20 years in jail or life imprisonment." I can't find her TikTok anyway. It looks like it might have been removed, but I have found some screenshots of what people have reshared online. You can see she was posting some TikToks promoting crime and like wads of cash. So I generally don't know what's going to happen to her. It is quite a deep case. So let me know what you guys think on what's going to happen, if she's going to make it back to the UK, if she's going to get life imprisonment.
So this guy says that last year, 2024, his girlfriend's uncle came to visit them. He doesn't live that far away, but he does live around 3 hours away from where they are. The uncle owns a lot of cabins that are out in the middle of nowhere, and he rents them out from time to time. During the visit, the uncle had told his girlfriend and the girlfriend's dad that he was going to leave for a few months out of the country, and they were entrusting them with the keys to the cabins. The uncle tells them that they can go whenever they want and just check up on the property from time to time, because he doesn't plan on renting them out, being that he was going to be out of the country and he just didn't want to deal with anything that would happen. But yeah, he let them know, hey, you can go whenever you want, you can go with your friends, it's not a big problem. Around that same time, he explains that he was going through a really rough time at school and at home. At school, he needed to turn in this really important project that would make him graduate. However, he couldn't get any peace at home because he had gotten into a fight with his roommate. He was telling all this to his girlfriend, and that's when the girlfriend's dad overheard his situation and said, hey, maybe you can go stay in one of the cabins so that you can finish your project. They explained to him that the only thing he might not have would be the Wi-Fi, but honestly, he's like, I wanted that. I needed to unplug. I needed to focus on this project, so I took them up on the offer. He ends up driving up to the cabin, and the cabins were actually really far away from where he lived, but again, he said he needed that space. He needed to focus. When he finally makes it into the cabin, he notices that there's no other cabins like close by to that one. There's no little stores, like there's nowhere for him to go and like get anything. Even his phone wouldn't get like very little signal. There were moments where the phone would connect and he would get a whole bunch of texts and calls, and then it would disconnect and his phone was basically had no service at all. When he gets into the cabin, he ends up opening all the windows just to get some fresh air flowing. He said that the cabin smelled a little bit old, like old wood, but he could tell nobody had been there in a little while. None of that really mattered, honestly, because he just really wanted to focus on his work. So he pulled out his laptop, started working, but he doesn't realize what what moment he accidentally fell asleep on his laptop. He actually woke up because his phone started ringing, and when he got his phone, it was like an unknown number. He almost didn't answer because again, he didn't know whose number that was, but he still did. And when he picked up the phone, he said that it was a very weird, strange voice, very slowly saying,
"Don't forget to close the windows."
He got chills running down his spine, and when he turned to look at the windows, he realized that he indeed had left the windows open before he had fallen asleep. He immediately gets up and closes all the windows, but he still didn't understand who could have made that phone call, because the only people who knew that he was there was his girlfriend, the girlfriend's dad. They wouldn't prank call him like this, and it also wasn't their phone number that had called him. He started to think that maybe somebody was observing him, somebody was watching him, but there was no other like cabins or houses or places around him that somebody could hide behind to do that. And again, nobody knew that he was there. It's not like he made the crazy loudest sound, so that really threw him off. He was so scared that he grabbed all of his belongings, closed that cabin up, and left. He ended up going to a hotel for the night where he did end up finishing his project. He explains that he never told his girlfriend or the girlfriend's dad what happened, but every once in a while his girlfriend's like, "Oh, we should go to the cabin one night," and he's like, "I don't know how many times she's gonna ask me where I'm telling her no, but I don't even want to tell her what happened up there." But what he does know is that he does not want to go back there. But what do you guys think happened?
Do you ever think how you can live with somebody, sleep next to them every single night, yet you still don't really know who they are? There's this guy, and he thought his wife was just playing silly little pranks on him until the pranks got really dark. He realized that his wife wasn't just trying to scare him, but she was enjoying doing it. Here's what's happened. He'll be cooking dinner in the kitchen doing his own thing, and he will feel eyes on him. Like, you know when you feel somebody's watching you, and he will turn around and she'll just be there, standing, watching him with her eyes wide open. He'd catch her standing behind a wall or a curtain just watching him, silent, does not say a word, does not laugh. And then when he acknowledges her standing there like a weirdo, just watching her with her eyes wide open, she'll just run off and not say a thing. It got weirder and weirder. She would squeeze into cupboards and just watch him, or go under the bed and watch him until he notices. And when he noticed, she wouldn't even acknowledge it. She wouldn't laugh. She would just kind of get up and just continue like nothing ever happened. All of a sudden, she just stopped. And one night over dinner, he brought it up jokingly and said, "Oh, I don't see you peeping at me anymore." And she replied, "Maybe I'm just better at it." After that, it started to spiral. One night, he's in the shower with the bathroom door locked. And as he's showering, he hears a sound. So he pulls the curtain and nobody's there. So he pulls back the curtain, turns around, and she's in the shower with him, standing there, eyes wide open, soaking wet. He then freaks out, screams at her, and tells her to leave. She's now left the bathroom. He starts to hear this heavy, excited, like breathing sound. And he's in the bathroom terrified. He's too scared to open the door because he's scared his wife's standing outside the bathroom door. But he's also too scared to look under the door because he's scared he's going to see her eyes peeping under the door. You can just hear this excited, heavy breathing. It just keeps going on and on and on until he realizes the sound is not coming from outside of the door. He turns around and looks into the bathroom cupboard where his wife is there standing, staring at him, smiling and heavy breathing. That was it. He grabs his bag, runs and drives all the way to his brother's house. Tries to explain it to his brother, like, this is not a prank, she's haunting me. He's decided to stay at his brother's house for the night. And later that evening, they're all chilling together. They see his wife face pressed up against the window, staring at them into the house, saliva dripping down the window, and then she disappears and then she runs off. This guy does not know what to do at this point, so he calls her mum and tells her everything, but she straight up hangs up on him, and he felt like she knew something but was just not telling him. Days go by and he finally builds up the courage to go back to the house. It's pitch black, all the curtains are closed, all the family photos are shattered and smashed on the floor. It's trash, the whole place is trash, and there's this really disgusting, rotting stench smell. It smelled like something was decaying. That's when he finds it. He finds an eyeball, a literal, real eyeball. Opens a cupboard and inside is filled with animal eyes, all different shapes and sizes, real animal eyes. Then he hears it again, excited, heavy breathing. Follows the sound and looks under the bed, and she's there, staring at him, smiling, heavy breathing and covered in blood He's gripping onto a shard of glass in her hand, and he goes down to her and says, I want to help you, because after all, that's his wife. And she reaches out and stabs him. In that moment, he knew that that's not his wife anymore. That's when he runs and he never looks back. He does not go to his brother's house because he's scared to go there, because he knows that she knows where his brother's house is and she's already been there. So he ends up checking into a hotel, and he swears he still feels like somebody is watching him.
This guy, Andrew, emailed me and he was like, I saw your crazy roommate story. I have to tell you mine. When I read the details of this email, my jaw was on the floor. It's disgusting. You cannot make this stuff up. 5 or 6 years ago, Andrew moves out of his parents' house. He's getting his first apartment. He meets a guy on Craigslist and they move in together. He said he really needed to move out at that point in his life because he's one of 7 children. Money was tight, space was tight. So like he had no other options. So Mark is his Craigslist roommate. Mark is off the bat really quiet, really awkward, really shy. They actually don't end up talking much, but like it's not a bad roommate situation. Like Mark's pretty respectful. They greet each other when they pass each other, but like don't really have a friendship or a relationship. Andrew's living there for 5 months with no problems when things start to get weird. One night, Andrew's getting home and he gets a text from Mark saying that Mark is going to be out of the apartment tonight. So he doesn't think anything of it. He doesn't respond, leaves him on read, and he goes into his room, turns on his PC, puts on his headphones and starts playing video games. And he's playing games for like an hour when he feels somebody touch his shoulder, and he jumps and turns around because he doesn't expect anyone to be there, and Mark's standing there. So Andrew jumps and he turns around and he's like, I'm sorry, like I didn't think you were going to be home tonight. You just scared me. And Mark's just like, why would I not be at home? I'm always home at night. And Andrew's like, well, you texted me that you weren't going to be here. And Mark's like, I don't know what you're talking about. So Andrew doesn't think anything of it because he thinks he just like read the text in a weird way, or maybe it was written in a weird way. And Mark goes to bed. And then an hour later, Andrew goes to bed. While he's asleep, he wakes up to the sound of something shattering in the kitchen. So he runs out. He thought that maybe Mark just broke a dish or something, but he sees Mark sitting on the floor in the kitchen, self-harming with pieces of a plate. So he starts screaming at Mark. He's like, what are you doing? And Mark just looks at him very calmly and is like, what does it look like? Andrew's like freaking out. So he turns all the lights on. He's like trying to talk him out of it. Mark puts the plate down and basically just says like, I don't want to talk about it. Then he gets really mad at Andrew and he's like, you know what? Next time I'm just going to use a knife, since all you care about is your dishes anyway. He gets up, he storms past Andrew, goes to his room and like slams the door. Andrew decided to text him to be like, are you okay? Like, do you want to talk anymore? And Mark just responds, yeah, like YEA, yeah. Andrew could barely sleep. The whole thing was extremely disturbing to him because Mark had never been rude, never been weird, never been aggressive. So he's just like totally out of pocket with what to do. He tries to talk to Mark again the next day and Mark is like dismissive of the whole thing and basically treats Andrew's concern like a joke. So Andrew decides that if he does anything else, he's going to call 911, but this time he's just going to respect Mark and say that he was having like a depressive or like manic episode. A week later, Andrew is studying at his desk. His door's open and he turns to look and he sees Mark standing at the doorway of his room. And his eyes are weird. They're like glazed over, not focused, but he can tell he's looking at him and his mouth's open. So Andrew's like, do you need anything? And Mark just like makes a wet smacking noise with his lips. So Andrew's talking to him and he's not acknowledging anything Andrew's saying. And he just keeps making this sound and like he's just standing there for like 15 minutes and Andrew's like getting really freaked out and really uncomfortable naturally. So Andrew gets up and like literally pushes him out of the doorway and closes the door. And Mark's just standing there like still making the noise. And Andrew's like really disturbed. So he goes and he calls his friend who tells him that he needs to call to get Mark evaluated for like mental health issues. And then he calls his brother and his brother's like, no, don't do that because you're going to lose your roommate. He's like, if he's paying rent and everything's good, just like let him be. A month goes by. Mark is still acting weird, but Andrew said like most things were like too small to mention and he wasn't necessarily a victim. Like Mark would stay out all night. He wouldn't come out of his room. He would just act weird and erratic around the apartment. But the final straw comes one night when Andrew wakes up to use the bathroom and he goes in the bathroom, turns on the lights and finds Mark eating his own feces out of the toilet. Andrew freaks out naturally, screams at him, calls him a freak, and he said looking back it was really harsh, but he was just so shocked in the moment. And everything else that Mark had been doing just really made him blow up. And Mark just looks at him and tells him to grow a pair. Then Mark goes back to doing what he was doing. And Andrew's so freaked out that he packs a bag and he leaves to go get a hotel that night. He calls him in the morning. He's like, I don't want to be roommates with you anymore. Like, you need to move out. And Mark starts crying on the phone. He's like begging him not to kick him out. And a few hours later, he's like, okay, I'll leave. And Andrew also ended up switching apartments because he said he just didn't feel safe anymore. A week after they break the lease and move out, he finds out that Mark has attacked someone at a train station. The person he attacked retaliated and Mark was unalived by his wounds. There's a little more to the story. The details are very graphic, so I couldn't include them because it's TikTok. But Andrew ended his email by saying that he has actually blamed himself a few times for Mark's unaliving. And he suspects that he was acting that way because of schmugs and that he really wishes that he had called someone sooner. Andrew will be seeing the comments, so be nice. And keep sending me your creepy, crazy, spooky story times, and I will keep posting them in this playlist. So I have polls on my Insta every day of which story you guys want to hear next, so follow me there.
Understand, Lake Lanier is a very large lake, and there are all of these small little islands that are positioned about that you can actually take your boat to, you can camp at, and some of these places have cabins. Now, there was this guy named Ryan. Ryan said that every summer, him and his friends would go out to Lake Lanier to their friend's father's cabin. And they would stay and spend like a couple days. Well, this particular summer in July, they decided they would go out to the cabin and spend 5 nights there. Well, in order to get to the cabin, you have to get on a boat. And you have to take it a half a mile and then get on the dock and then go out to the cabin. So they make it there. And later that night, they got a big campfire going. They started to do a little bit of drinking, and they were having a good time when they decided to go down by the dock. As they're all hanging out on the dock, screaming and laughing, they hear a loud splashing sound, which sounded kind of like a fish jumping in the water. And at the time, they thought it was a fish. Hey, we should go get our fishing poles. And they start looking around to see if they could figure out like where the weights in the water was. But as they look out, that's when one of the friends says, "What is that? Like, what is that?" And they are all directed towards something in the water. And it is lit up by the moonlight. As they take a closer glance, they could see what looks like a head with its chin above the water. It has this black stringy hair, pale white face, and it didn't have any eyes. And they're like, "No, that can't be real. Like, what is that?" And, they're just confused. Like, why is there like a head just chilling in the water? Well, they started discussing amongst themselves, like, maybe it's just some kind of bird, or like a loon, and it's dunking its head in the water, and it just looks like a head. And they're like, yeah, that's probably what's going on. So they go back to the cabin, and they start drinking some more. Well, Ryan has to use the bathroom, so he walks back out to the dock, and he starts going. He looks over in that direction where they had seen this head, and he sees the head again. Except this time, it is closer to the dock, and it's just sort of looking at him, moving its head back and forth. But it's staying stationary. It is not moving through the water. It is not floating. And he's like, how can this thing still be there? So he runs and gets his friends, and it's like, the head is still out there. And they're like, this cannot be real. Like, this isn't happening. Well, they discuss it amongst themselves again, and they say, you know what? It must just be like some kind of log, and we're mistaking it for a head. So they go back to the cabin again, and they decided, all right, let's go to bed. So they go into their rooms, and, it was a really hot night, so they had the windows open, and they all fall asleep. Well, that's when Ryan awakes to what sounds like footsteps outside of the cabin. And this went on for like 5 or 10 minutes, and whatever it was, it sounded like someone was pacing back and forth between the cabin and the dock. And that's when all of a sudden, Ryan's friend comes running in his room and is like, we got to get out of here right now. We have to leave. And he's like, why? What's going on? He's like, just come on. We have to leave. We have to get out of here. And he's like, well, just tell me what is going on. And he's like, well, I was asleep in my bed, and I woke up. I went to turn over, and when I looked out the window, I seen that head that we seen in the water with its chin kind of lifted above the windowsill, looking at me. And he's like, we need to get out of here right now. So they all left the cabin. They got in the car, and they started to drive away. And that's when his friend, just started freaking out, and he was crying and was like, what was it that we seen? Like, what is that? What was it? And it just didn't make any sense to him. And they left and got out of there. The next day, they told the person's father who owned the cabin. He went out there, he checked, he didn't find anything. But still to this day, Ryan says that friend was affected by whatever he's seen that night.
Never make fun of a bruja. So this guy says that he got really into listening to people's paranormal stories and things like that, so much to the point that one day he went up to his parents and asked them if they've ever experienced anything. When he asked his parents, he noticed that his dad got really pale and serious, and the dad decided that he was gonna tell him a story because it has been eating him up inside. So the dad, Don Manuel, said that when he was little, he had a best friend named Gina. He explains that Gina was always a little rebel, always up to no good, but it was always fun to be around her. All the kids in school had a biggest crush on Gina, but he always saw Gina as a sister. He said they always had a really nice relationship, but out of nowhere, Gina started acting really weird. One day, Gina goes up to Don Manuel and tells him that she knows a really cool magic magic trick, but that this magic trick was really dangerous. She explains to him that if he wanted to see that magic trick, they were gonna have to sneak out in the middle of the night, and they were gonna have to go to the place that everybody in that town was scared of. People were really scared of that land because they said that that's where the witches would go to. At one point, people tried like growing crops there and nothing would grow, nothing happened, so people would try to stay away from that place. He didn't say yes to her right away. It was after like weeks and weeks of convincing that he finally agreed to sneak out and go to that dead land with Gina. Where the dead place was, there was like a big, kind of like a foresty place with trees. It was only in that area that nothing grew. It was just dead land. So when they get there, Gina tells him that he has to go hide behind the tree and that no matter what happens, you need to stay behind that tree and don't ever come out at all until I come and get you. And Don Manuel agreed. So he stays behind the tree and he's watching Gina, and she walks to that dead land straight in the middle, and she has a bag next to her. He notices that she pulls out like white powder out of her bag. What this white powder was, he has no idea. Gina starts saying something and he realizes that what she's saying is not Spanish. It sounds like a completely different language. He says that it almost sounds like she's singing it, and as she's saying those words, she's forming like a circle, but she's not completely closing the circle with that white powder. He noticed when she was just about to close the circle, she actually walks to the middle of it, makes some sort of symbol, walks out, and then she finally closes that circle. Gina then walks in front of the tree that he's hiding behind, extends her arms, and she's still like singing or saying those things, but now she's saying it out to the sky. Don Manuel cannot believe what he's seen, because as she's saying these things, he's noticing like balls of fire getting closer and closer to the area that they are. He said more and more balls of fire start coming and moving in circular motions, and then out of nowhere, one of these balls of fire just falls down from the sky, and it sounds like a woman screaming, and it lands in that circle that Gina had just created. Don Manuel says that that ball of fire almost got a little smaller and it was contained in that circle, and it almost looked like it was trying to escape that circle, but something was keeping that ball of fire in there. That's when Gina pulls her arms down, looks back at Don Manuel and says, "Did you like my trick?" Don Manuel is terrified and asks Gina what he's looking at, like, what is that? Gina says, "It's a witch. It's a witch. My grandma taught me how to catch them and I trapped her in there." So Don Manuel is like, "Well, what are you gonna do with her? What's going on?" And Gina says, "Nothing. Let's leave her there. She already saw me. There's nothing she can do. I trapped her." Gina then walks closer to where the circle is, starts taunting the witch, like, "Haha, you can't do anything. I trapped you. There's nothing you can do about it." And then she walks back to where Don Manuel is. In that moment, Don Manuel says that he heard a voice coming from where that circle was. Gina turns around and it was almost like they were having a conversation, but he couldn't understand because it seemed like a completely different language. He says that that's when Gina turned to him, looked very scared, and tells them, "Let's go home, let's go," and they start running out of that place. When they get to Don Manuel's house and he's about to sneak back in, that's when Gina tells him, "Hey, please don't tell your parents and don't tell my grandmother any of this." Don Manuel tells her, "Why did your grandmother even show you this trick?" Gina tells him, "It's because she didn't teach me. She had a book and I read it and it worked. But the witch got really mad, so don't tell anybody, please." Don Manuel says that he sneaked into his house, Gina went about her way, but Gina never got home. No one heard from her again after that. Don Manuel says that he thinks that the family knows exactly what happened. That even though it was a long time ago and maybe they didn't have like technology they do now, the family didn't even try looking for Gina, which is why he thinks they know exactly what happened to her. And obviously he was like, this is something that you should never make fun of and never play around with. And have you asked your parents if they have a story that they might want to share with you? Can you imagine asking your parents, "Oh, do you know any experiences?" and then hearing that? Anyway, what do you guys think?
Que sí, ¿qué hace eso? Pues ahorita ya se prendieron unas, ya se están apagando. La que está en la punta.
La que estaba en la punta no estaba prendida y se acababa de prender.
Mira, se están prendiendo. Mira. Ya están apagando.
Mira. Sí.
I had to turn on all my lights after reading this story. If you're new here, hi. I usually talk about some pretty scary stuff, and today I'm going to be talking about a story that I've been kind of putting off making the video for. And a huge driving factor on this, and now I'm going to be fully transparent about this. I'm not a fan of making videos about demonic things or demons specifically because every single time I've made a video, whether it's my personal experience or if it's someone else's, I hear things in either the background or in the audio, and I have to reshoot it, something, every single time. I've also had instances where my dogs are growling at things that are not there, so you get the gist on why I'm a little hesitant to make videos about demonic things. But without further ado, let's get into it. This story comes from Lexi, who lives in West Virginia and lives in a very haunted house. She says that the hauntings started around the time when she was 6. Just for context purposes, she was 4 when her parents got a divorce, and her mom started seeing this man when she was around 6 years old, and shortly after, all of these hauntings started. And at first it was small occurrences, like her mom telling her to pick up her toys, so she would do so, and when they would come back, the toys would be scattered all across the floor. And she mentions during these instances, her mom and her both were afraid because they both knew that it was almost impossible for these things to be happening. But they continued to brush off these little noises, these little occurrences, because they could be coincidental. And Lexi says that this continued for 2 years before her mom's boyfriend moved in, and his parents actually lived down the street from Lexi's mom, where all of this stuff is occurring. And one night, Lexi, her mom, and her mom's boyfriend go down to his parents' house to have dinner. A couple of his cousins were over with their kids, and there was this little girl there who was like 2 years older than Lexi at the time, so little girl was 10, Lexi was 8. And when they were playing, this little girl just out of the blue says, "Did you know that there's an old woman who lives in the bedroom upstairs?" And at the time, she thought it was creepy, but she just kind of brushed it off, thinking that the little girl was just trying to scare her. A couple days later, her mom is walking up the stairs to use the bathroom, and Lexi just tells her mom, "Hey, little girl's name said that there is a woman who lives in the bedroom upstairs." Her mom kind of turns around and is like, "Which bedroom?" So Lexi walks upstairs, gets to the door, and goes to look in and points and says, "This one." And as she does, she did in fact see a woman standing there, very pale, black hair, and a long nightgown. Lexi specifically said that it looked like it was from the early 1900s. And obviously upon seeing this, Lexi ran downstairs, and her mom was really confused until they got back to their house and she explained the entire situation. Lexi's mom's boyfriend was overhearing this conversation and asked her to describe this woman. And when she did, he then said that they had been seeing that same woman there for years. And this is where things take a turn for the worse. Lexi says from that point on, the encounters in her house that were once very small became very amplified and very scary. And she said specifically that many nights she would feel like there was something in the room with her, even more specifically watching her sleep. But again, she brushed it off because she thought she was just scared. Until she was having a friend sleep over, and her friend woke her up in the middle of the night to specifically tell Lexi that she had seen a woman looking at her from over the footboard, just like this. And Lexi thought it was a joke until her friend described the exact same woman she had been seeing. And I guess things get even worse, because after this instance, Lexi's mom begins telling her that she has been seeing her walk around the house when she is not home. She can hear Lexi talking when she is not home. And Lexi had been seeing this woman in mirrors, like when she's brushing her teeth, for example. And on top of this, and what I think is the scariest, Lexi would hear clapping when nobody else was home, and people talking when nobody else is home. And most recently, she tells me that they have 2 dogs, and she brought one of the dogs into her room when she starts to hear the other dog whining and a woman talking to her dog. So immediately she opens the door, tells the other dog, like, "Mom's home." The dog does not get up and greet her mom like he would normally do. And when Lexi walks out to go see her mom, she finds out that her mom is not home, her car is not in the driveway, and she is still at work. So again, she goes back in her room, closes the door. Clear as day, hears a woman say, "Come here, where are you?" And she can hear the dog go from whining to barking. So immediately, she thinks that someone has broken into her house. She locks her door, gets her softball bat out, and calls her mom to come home immediately. The dog she had with her began barking, and thankfully, her mom only works like 10 minutes away, so she rushed home. But during the time of her mom coming home, Lexi began to hear heavy footsteps coming towards her door. And Lexi specifically states that the energy felt so heavy, and when whatever was outside of the door got to the door, it got eerily silent, and the keychain she has on her door began swaying back and forth. Her mom then got home, found no one in the house, and Lexi believes that the spirit attached itself to her and followed them home and has not left. Because that last instance happened like 3 weeks ago. And before I get into anything else, I just have to pause and say I've had to cut a couple of things out because I was hearing banging noises on my wall. And if you don't know, now you do. I either film early in the morning or late at night. I do this because then I don't have to worry about outside noises or my neighbors being awake, etc. So I don't know, and it's furthering the I don't like making videos about demons kind of thing. What really freaked me out was the clapping and obviously the lady looking over the footboard. I don't like that. And I swear I can almost see her face when I'm talking about this. And when I read it the first time, I could see her. But anyways, that's going to do it for me. Stay tuned for more ghost stories.
This guy DM'd me and he said, if you promise to keep me anonymous, you can share my story. I've never told anyone this, but to this day, it still haunts me. I'll be honest, when I first read this, I wasn't sure if it was true, but he swears up and down that this really happened, so I'll share. He calls himself Mike for the sake of this story. So in the early 90s, Mike is working as a manager at a fast casual restaurant. It was and still is a pretty popular chain. He's in his early 30s at this point. He has a kid that's a freshman in high school and then another one that's in 7th grade. He's a pretty simple guy. He's generally well liked at work. He brings his morning crew donuts. He brings his night crew candy. He tries to keep it pretty positive at work. And even though he's well liked as a manager, his employees are of transient nature. They're always coming and going. A lot of them are high schoolers because it's a pretty low-paying job. Some of them are ex-cons because the business gets a tax break for every felon they hire. He actually knows a lot of the teenagers that he hires because his kids have grown up with them. So one day Mike's leaving work, he's pulling out of the parking lot and he feels somebody slam in the back of his truck and he gets out and he's like, what is this? And he sees Dee, it's one of his high school employees. And Dee jumps out of the car and he's freaking out and like hyperventilating because he's driving an old beater and his car is tore up. Mike looks at the damage on the back of his truck and he sees it's basically just a little tiny like cosmetic scratch, but this kid's car is ruined. And Mike actually knows Dee. Dee is the same age as Mike's oldest son, and Dee's from a troubled background, troubled family, and he actually has his own baby on the way. So Mike feels bad that Dee is so upset by this accident. So when Dee asks him not to call the cops because he doesn't have insurance, Mike doesn't think twice about it. He's like, of course I'm not going to ruin your life over this. Dee's like, thank you so much. Like, I will pay you back for this scratch. Like, I swear to God, as soon as I get some money, I'll pay you back. He's like, don't even worry about it. A couple days go by, and Dee's having some trouble getting to and from work because his car is still in the shop. He can't afford to fix it, and he can't afford a new one. One day he comes up to Mike in the office. He's about to clock out, and he's like, hey man, like, I know you're getting off in an hour. Would you mind dropping me off at home? I don't have a ride today. Keep in mind, this is the early 90s, so like before Uber and Lyft, and Mike also said it was a small town, so it's not like cabs were readily available. Mike's like, of course I'll drive you home. Where do you live? And Dee tells him, and it's actually on the way back to Mike's house. So he's like, yeah, no problem. He drives him home that day. The house is like run down. There's weeds all over. Just not a good living environment. But Dee is super appreciative for the ride. He thanks him and gets out of the truck. This ride home situation becomes more frequent as the weeks go on, but Mike really doesn't mind. And then one day at work, Dee approaches Mike in the office and he's like, hey man, I'm having some problems with money. I really need to get some diapers for this new baby. Like, would you mind spotting me $20 until my check comes? And Mike is like a genuinely good person. So he's like, yeah, of course. Like, you know what? Don't even worry about the $20. And he gives it to him. It's not even payday yet when Dee comes back up and he asks him for $40. Mike shuts this down pretty quick. He's like, hey, I'm your employer. It's not appropriate for me to be giving you money all the time. I was happy to help. I'm always happy to help, but I can get you some more hours. I can get you maybe some overtime. Just like, let me know what you need. He's like, okay, sorry for asking. Thanks anyway. He comes up to him again and he says, Mike, I really need your help with something. My girl and I are trying to get an apartment for the new baby and we don't have enough credit, so we need a co-signer. Like, would you be willing to do that for me? And Mike does feel bad, but ultimately he says no because he has his own kids to take care of and he can't afford to be co-signing for somebody he barely knows. And when he tells Dee no, he sees his face go dark. And Dee's quiet for a minute, and then all of a sudden he just explodes in anger. And he's like, what, you think you're better than me because you were privileged and you've had more opportunities and you make more money than me? And Mike's like, no, like, I told you I'd help you out as much as I can. I can get you more hours, whatever you need, but I cannot co-sign for you for this apartment. So Dee gets quiet, and he's like, all right, I understand, and he leaves. That night, it's a couple hours later, Mike closes up the stories by himself, counts the safe, locks the door, walks out to the parking lot to his truck, but blocking the path from him to his truck is Dee. He's just standing there in the dark, still in his work uniform, and as Mike gets closer, he says he smelled alcohol. And he's walking up to his truck, and Dee's standing there, and he's just yelling at him and cussing at him again. What, you think you're better than me? I busted my ass for this job, and you're the reason I don't have a car to begin with, and now you're going to screw me over when I need you. Mike ends up calming him down and tells him basically, get in the truck, I'm going to take you home. Dee is silent on the way home, and they pull up to his house, and he rips off his apron, he throws it in the truck, and he's like, fuck you, I won't forget what you did to me. I'm going to find a job with someone that appreciates me. I quit. You better watch your back. back because I'm going to ruin your life. And he slams the door. So Mike feels bad, but ultimately it's not his problem. The next day at work, he's opening with his buddy Calvin, and he hired Calvin around the same time that he got hired. So they've been working together for like 7 years at this point. Calvin is Mike's employee, but they're buds. You know, they're pretty similar. They're both quiet, but they keep it positive, lighthearted. But Calvin's also an ex-con who's now turned his life around. Mike says he would trust him with his life. This man would not hurt a fly. And he's just venting to Calvin about the whole D situation and what he said. And Calvin just kind of smiles and he's like, you want me to take care of him for you? And Mike just laughs it off. 2 weeks go by and D comes in to pick up his final paycheck. And then when Mike's leaving that night, he notices all his tires have been slashed in the parking lot. He figures it was probably D in an act of retaliation, but he has no proof, so he just shrugs it off, fixes it, and goes on with his life. He gets a phone call from D later that night, and he picks up, and D's like, you get my message? And Mike's like, what are you talking about? And he's like, you see your car? That's the first thing that's going to happen to you if you don't co-sign for me. Mike just hangs up on him. He's like, this kid is not going to blackmail me into co-signing an apartment for him. He's like, what's he going to do? Then Mike's oldest son gets viciously attacked as he's leaving soccer practice. The person who attacked him was wearing a ski mask and a hood and dark clothes, but he beat him so viciously that he ended up in the hospital with a few broken ribs. And this naturally really infuriated Mike because his oldest son was like his pride and joy. He was like a star soccer player, really good student, just like good kid all around. Did not deserve to get attacked by some random person. He didn't know it was D, but he had a feeling. He tells Calvin about this whole thing at work, and Calvin's like visibly upset by this because Calvin also knows Mike's son. He's basically an uncle to him at this point. They've known each other for so long. A few days later, Mike's at work and the cops pull up. They come in the restaurant. They start asking all the employees questions about D. They found his body the night before in a ditch, thrown through the windshield of his girlfriend's mom's car that he'd been driving. It was a car accident, and they were just asking if anyone had been with him or seen him or knew anything about what happened. Calvin comes into work later and he goes up to Mike and he's like, oh, that's crazy about D, huh? Like, I guess life's just unpredictable. And Mike's like, yeah, I guess life is unpredictable, and sometimes bad things just happen to people and some people are just unlucky. Calvin grabs a rag and he starts wiping down the counter and he's like, yeah, or maybe someone gave him a little push, you know? Mike's like, what do you mean by that? And Calvin's like, sometimes people make bad choices and sometimes those choices it's just the law of karma. Mike said there was no malice in his voice at all. His eyes were calm, but he was almost too calm. Calvin never said anything incriminating and didn't elaborate, but Mike says that he just had this gut feeling, like he knew that Calvin did something. Calvin did end up passing away, but Mike said up until his death, he felt like in Calvin's world, favors could mean life or death, and he felt like he owed him one. Keep sending me these stories. I have one about a witch doctor. I have one about a neighbor that wanted more than butter. And I have one from someone who admitted that they were the crazy roommate. So let me know which one you guys want to hear next, and I will keep adding them to this playlist.
There are other people who are coming forward with stories that they remember places being filled, packed full of people all the time. And now it seems like so many people have just disappeared. Now, there was this man named Tim. Tim said that he was going through like this period of time where he was kind of lamenting on things and remembering a lot of his younger years. Well, one day he said he happened to walk by this park and he got this sort of flashback of him playing with this boy who had red hair. And as he started to go to other places, he would get these memories of this red-headed boy with freckles, and you know, they would play in different places, or they would be at his parents' house sliding down the stair rail, or swinging on a tire swing in front of his house. But at the same time, Tim didn't know who this person was. So he asked his parents one day, like, do you remember when I was younger, did I ever play with a boy who had red hair and freckles? And his parents are like, no, not that we know of. Like, we know pretty much all your friends, and we do not recall this person. And he starts asking people around, people he grew up with, do you remember this guy with red hair and freckles? And they're like, no, we don't know who you're talking about. But for some reason, he just had these vague memories like this person existed. So after some time, he just sort of kind of puts it away and forgets about it. But said a couple years after that, he came home one day and he looked on his computer and there was a message. And when he read the message, it said, you know, hi, Tim, like, how have you been? And he was like, well, who is this? Like, who sent me a message? So he, you know, sent back, you know, I'm doing all right. Like, who is this? And this message, or he gets a message back, and it's this guy saying, like, you know, we used to be childhood friends, and, you know, this is my name, and, like, we grew up together. And he's like, okay, well, yeah, I mean, I'm having memories about you. Like, where are you at now? Like, what have you been up to? And all of a sudden, he gets one more message, and it says, help, we are all trapped. And he, writes back, like, what do you mean? But he never gets a response. And it was like that was the last message he got from whoever this person was. So he starts thinking about it. And he's like, is someone messing with me? Like, how can this be? Later that night, he goes to bed. And in the morning, when he wakes up, he said above his headboard, scratched into the wall, was the word help.
However, according to the phrase, you can't make this stuff up, might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
Have you ever been scratched by a demon? If you're new here, hi. I usually talk about some pretty scary stuff, and not so recently I opened an email where anyone who finds this page would be able to send me their ghost stories. I chose this one in particular because it involves something that I've never heard of before, which is a game called Cat Scratch. So let's get into it. This story comes from someone who would like to remain anonymous, and for obvious reasons I'm going to respect that. And for context purposes, this took place at a sleepover when she was like 13. And everything was going normal. They were having snacks, they were watching movies, and then they got bored around 2 a.m. And it is at this point where the girl who sent me this email says that she wanted to play this game called Cat Scratch. And the girl who sent me this says that she's actually played this game before prior to this incident and nothing happened the first time. So the way this girl describes the game to me is you have to play with two people, the narrator and the player. The narrator is sitting crisscross applesauce on the floor, and the player lays their head down in the narrator's lap. And the narrator goes on to tell the story about a cat, I'll get into what they say, while rubbing the temples of the player. The player's job is to visualize the story that the narrator is telling. I also want to make note before I get a comment about you're not supposed to tell the story. The story is fine unless you're playing the game. And I did write the story down so I could just tell you guys in one take instead of having to clip the video for every sentence I remember. But the story goes like this. There once was an old lady who owned a cat. The cat was very nice. It meowed and purred. One day, the cat got hit by a car and... Cat scratch, cat scratch, cat scratch. The old lady got a new cat. The cat was very mean. It hissed and clawed. Cat scratch, cat scratch, cat scratch. One day, the cat got hit by a car and the lady decided not to get any more cats. Cat scratch, cat scratch, cat scratch. And I guess there's a second version of the story, but the girl couldn't find it. But I'm assuming it's close to the same story. Anyways, after you are done telling the story, the person who's laying in your lap as the narrator gets up and you're supposed to grab their shirt and like pull them back. And they're immediately supposed to stand up and you're supposed to look at their back. And as this girl is describing this game to her friends, did you hear that? I just went back and listened to the audio to see if I caught it finally. And if you turn the volume all the way up, you can very faintly hear on the video. Anyways, back to the story, sorry. As this girl is describing this game to her friends were like, oh yeah, we played that before and nothing happened. So they look up on the internet to like see if it's real. And all the sources are saying, yes, it's real, but it's really just a harmless game to play with your friends. So they decided to play the game. And this is where things get a little scary in my opinion. They decide to play cat scratch in the attic of this girl's house. And it is very important to note that none of them really believed in the paranormal at the time. The first time that they played this game, nothing happened. The girl who sent me this email was acting as the narrator because she knew the game the best. And she personally thinks that the game didn't work the first time because it has to be a completely silent room and her friends were like giggling and thinking it was fake. They played it a second time, nothing happened, and the girl who sent me this says that she thinks that the reason why it didn't work is because the game was interrupted again. Her phone screen darkened with the story on it and she had to click it, which meant she had to remove her fingers from the temples of the person laying in her lap. I also forgot to mention that the reason why they were doing this in the attic was so that they were able to record this whole experience. On the third try, her friend sits up, the game went uninterrupted, and there are 3 white horizontal lines on her back. And this really freaked them out, so they took a 5-minute breather. So when they come back from their break, the girl who sent me this email was like, hey, I want to be the player instead of the narrator because I want to experience this too. And she says that she specifically moved to another part of the room and they did the cat scratch ritual in another part of the room because she was like, maybe there was something on the floor that was like scratching her back. We don't know. But it is important to note that she did not think this was real. The girl who sent me this says that she was really trying to imagine the story, and it felt like she was there. And when she sat up, there was a scratch across her back, and all of her friends started freaking out, and she started freaking out and demanded them to take a photo of it and show her. And that is when they just left it alone. But whatever was doing that to them was not done. And even when they showed their parents and their friends the footage of them getting scratched and playing this game, nobody believed them. And it wasn't until 5 months later where things really started getting weird. So the girl who sent me this email and her sister were standing in the kitchen, and the way that their kitchen is positioned in their home is the windows face out towards the backyard. And in their backyard, they have this garden, when all of a sudden, the girl who sent me this says she saw a man walk across the garden and disappear behind the shed. She tells her sister about it, and her sister is freaking out, grabs a kitchen knife, and goes to check the garden out. Middle of the day. She comes back, and there was no one there. This is the part that really scares me. 3 weeks after the garden incident, this girl is laying on her stomach in her bedroom, on her phone, watching TikTok, when all of a sudden, these hands start to come around her face like they are going to cover her eyes. And the way that she's describing these hands, it reminds me of charred skin with these long, disgusting nails. And she obviously freaks out. And when she moves, the hands get scared and they pull back. And she turns her lamp on. And when she turns around, she sees this man standing in the corner of her room. And she is staring at this thing for what feels like a minute before turning her lamp on, and the moment the lamp comes on, he's gone. And she proceeds to tell me that she continues to see this man in dark corners or just like little dark places when she's riding her bike home from school, when she's going to the bathroom, when she's anywhere. That is not where this stops though. This girl stays at the friend's house again on Halloween of this year, and they decide to play cat scratch again. And like I was saying earlier, there was a second version that she couldn't find, but it was much scarier. And they both played it twice as the narrator and the player, and were successful both times. Both of them had 3 horizontal scratches on their backs. And the girl who sent me this says that that is when she realized that this was not just a harmless game, and that whatever this game has in it is very powerful. And about a month later, she sleeps over again, but this is in the middle of the day where she's laying on her stomach again, watching TikTok, and out of the corner of her eye, she sees a figure walk in front of the doorway. And her friend was like down in the kitchen getting them snacks or something. And since it had been a pretty long time since anything weird happened, she decided to tell her friend's mom. So she tells her friend's mom, and her mom is like, oh, that's just grandpa. And the mom then goes into detail about how when the grandfather died, they left a lot of money for them to buy the house that they were in. And ever since they bought the house, they have been seeing him a lot. That didn't explain the entity that was in her room with the hat. And she says that she's seen him so often that he doesn't even scare her anymore. And from a personal perspective, I have no idea how people get used to hauntings, because I've seen some stuff, and every time I do or I experience something, it freaks me out every time without fail, even if it is days in a row. But anyways, that's gonna do it for me. Stay tuned for more ghost stories.
And he was 13 years old, making him the youngest murder defendant tried as an adult in New York State history. With that being said, I have to give a massive warning, as I do in a lot of my videos. This video does involve a child. So if you think that listening to this video is going to harm your mental health in any way, please skip this one, and I will see you in my next one. Take care of yourselves. I love you. Eric Smith lived with his mother, his stepdad, and his 2 siblings in New York. And when he was a child, he was not an easy child by any means. He often acted out and did things that wouldn't be considered normal. Like, for example, if he didn't get what he wanted, he would hold his breath for a really long time until his mother, Tammy, gave in and gave him whatever he wanted. When he was 3 years old, in the middle of the night, he got up and set a pile of papers on fire, which was incredibly dangerous, not only for himself, but for everyone else living inside the house. And by the time that he turned 9 years old, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, he had developed an for He was going through a pack a day, 9 years old. In school, Eric Smith was bullied relentlessly. He struggled with developmental issues. He was a couple grades behind in school because of this, and the bullies would just use this to constantly make fun of him. And Eric experienced terrible bullying at school every single day. And obviously, this affected his mental health negatively. Every day at school, he was called stupid, dumb, slow, ugly, and hearing that being repeated to him day after day after day, it turned into Eric starting to think of himself as those things, which is horrible. At a young age as well, Eric found out that his stepdad was not his biological father, and he found out that his biological father didn't want anything to do with him, which only further added to his depression and the negative thoughts that he often had about himself. Add to that the fact that his stepdad was kind of a horrible man. He was aggressive, he was mean, he was disrespectful. In other words, he had a terrible temper and he would take his anger out on his kids, both verbally and physically. So not a great childhood Eric Smith had. In my 1993, he was 13 years old, very much displaying disturbing behavior, very much struggling at school, and very much having a hard time at home with his home life as well. He's now being the bully. He's bullying kids while getting bullied. He's disrespecting his teachers, even at one point threatening one of them. He's developing a really concerning aggression and acting out both verbally and physically at home and at school. And he's just becoming more and more depressed, more anxious, more antisocial, and he started expressing his quote-unquote need or want to start bringing harm towards other people. It wasn't looking good as far as the path that he was heading down. 4-year-old Derek Roby was the most adorable little kid. He lived with his parents and his younger sibling in New York, and he was literally the epitome of a happy, active, loving 4-year-old baby. He loved playing outside, he loved playing sports, he loved spending time with his family, he loved animals, but more than anything, he loved being a big brother, and he was also so loved by so many people. On the morning of August 2nd in 1993, the Roby family started their morning off slower than usual. Derek's mom was occupied with his little brother who was a baby, and Derek was running late for summer camp. The walk from Derek's house to the park where the summer camp was taking place was only a 5 to 6 minute walk, and Derek was begging his mom to just let him walk because he was already running late. He didn't want to miss out on any time playing with his friends, and he was really eager to get to camp. And his mom ultimately made the decision to let him walk on his own. Like I said, it was around a 5-minute walk. It was straight down one road, and it was a route that Derek was very used to traveling down, but heartbreakingly so, his mother making the decision to allow him to walk on his own would be one that she would regret for the rest of her life. At the same time, 13-year-old Eric Smith was starting off his morning horribly. He just woke up on the wrong side of the bed. He was riding his bike around the park that Derek was heading to, and he was just being a menace. He was misbehaving, picking on kids at the park, being told to go away because he was being so disruptive, and then he noticed a little boy walking towards the park, Derek Roby. He rides his bike up to him, he starts talking to him, and he tells him that he knows that he's heading towards that park where the summer camp was taking place, and he told him that he knew a shortcut. And Derek, he's 4 years old, he's a baby, and Eric Smith is only 13 years old, and even though Derek would have probably considered him an older kid, he was still a kid at the end of the day, so for baby Derek to trust him isn't crazy. Of course, Derek didn't think, oh my god, this boy's gonna hurt me, he's out to get me. He probably just thought, okay, he knows a shortcut, I will go with him if it means that I can get to my friends faster. So the two of them start walking together. Eric leads him to a wooded area, and out of nowhere, he completely launches himself at Derek. With his hands, he's trying to attempt to cut off Derek's air supply. He's using both of his hands with such force around him until Derek falls to the ground. Derek is trying his hardest to fight back, but he's 4 years old. There's only so much fighting back that he could do. And then Eric grabs a napkin from Derek's backpack. He forms it into a ball and shoves it down his throat in an attempt to further stop him from breathing. He finds a rock and then a bigger one and uses it to strike Derek on his head. He then finds a 26-pound rock. He drags it over, he picks it up, and he drops it on top of Derek's little body 3 times. And as his last act of absolute horror, Eric then grabbed a stick from the ground and used it to SA Derek with it. Afterwards, he grabbed his little body and put it deeper in the woods in an attempt to hide it. And tragically, 4-year-old Derek Roby lost his life during that attack. And 13-year-old Eric, he just got up, he wiped off his hands that were covered in red liquid, hopped on his bike, and rode away. A couple hours later, the sky started to get really dark and it started to rain, meaning the kids from the summer camp were getting sent back home. Derek's mom, Doreen, was under the impression that this entire time Derek had been at the summer camp, and as soon as it started raining, she kind of just waited for him to walk in through the doors, but he didn't. And she recalls that she just had an awful feeling in her stomach. She didn't know why, but she just felt like something was terribly wrong. And when Derek didn't show up, and when she learned that he never made it to the summer camp to begin with, she felt sick. She panicked, she called the police, and very quickly a search started to find Derek Roby. The police were searching, volunteers were gathering to search, volunteers that included Eric Smith's parents, and less than 5 hours into the search, Derek's small body would be discovered in a patch of woods near the park. His body showed the results of a heinous attack. It was a mortifying sight for anyone who saw it. The woman who first saw him let out a loud scream, leading officers to run over and see what she had just found. Derek was covered in multiple injuries, an autopsy later showing multiple skull fractures, a lot of swelling on his brain, multiple head injuries, in addition to all of the open wounds all over his body, and the stick that Eric Smith had used was still on him. And in that moment, Derek's parents' world came crashing down. Their worst nightmare, one that they thought they would never have to face, was now true. Their firstborn, their 4-year-old son, who was the light of their world, was gone. He was taken away from this world in the most horrible way possible, and the devastation that they were now going to have to face was something that they were not prepared for. Immediately, authorities thought whoever did this was an adult, likely an adult from out of town, because people who lived in that area did not do things like this. Things like this did not happen in that town. The investigation began. Officers were questioning witnesses, kids from the camps, the parents of the kids from the camp, etc. And 3 days after the discovery of Derek's body, Eric's mom could see that Eric was acting stranger than usual, so she called the police to come over and talk to him again at their house, thinking that maybe he saw something or maybe that he had additional information that could be beneficial to the case, but she didn't think for a second that her son was the one responsible. She just thought that maybe he knew something that could be helpful. So officers show up at Eric's house, they sit him down, they talk to him further, and he says that he was riding his bike just after 9 a.m. when he noticed Derek walking towards the park. He said he didn't really see him well because he was on the opposite side of the park, but then he described in detail what Derek had been wearing that day in a suspicious amount of detail. And that made officers be like, you know what, let's just go to the park, let's reenact the morning, and let's go through where you were riding your bike, where you saw Derek, and let's just go from there. So they go to the park. Eric is standing with his bike in the same location that he said he was at when he first noticed Derek. And investigators noticed that from the spot that Eric claimed to be at, Eric should not have been able to see Derek, let alone what he was wearing, because it was just too far. And then during their conversation, Eric tells officers, I am not the type to do this to someone. I am not the type to SA someone. Yet, at that point, the SA that was done to Derek was not yet public information. Nobody knew that there was SA involved. There was no reason as to why Eric would have said anything of that sort. So that alone set off alarm bells in police officers' mind. They're thinking something is weird here, yet still they didn't think that he was the one capable of doing something like this, but they thought that maybe he saw something or knew more than he was letting on. Throughout the next few days, Eric started asking weird questions to the adults in his life. One of them being asking what the punishment would be if they found out that a child did this to another child. His mom noticed his weird behavior, as did his stepdad and his grandparents, and they sat him down to be like, okay, what is going on here? What do you know? Who did you see? And it was in that conversation that Eric turned around, looked at his mom, looked her in the eye and said, Mom, I did it. I snapped and I did it. I'm sorry, Mom. I little boy. Eric's grandpa, bless him, called the police immediately, and Eric was put in a cop car and driven to the station, which is where he gave his full confession. He described in detail what he had done to that 4-year-old little boy, and everyone was left in complete and utter disbelief. Eric's parents could not hear what they were listening to. The words that were coming out of their 13-year-old son's mouth, Derek's parents were absolutely mortified. Authorities were shook to their core, and when it was announced that Eric Smith, a 13-year-old boy, had been arrested and charged, his arrest became a national media sensation, leaving the public also shocked that a kid could be capable of committing such a terrible, terrible crime. Eric Smith pled not guilty, and in August of 1994, his trial began. The defense argued that Eric had a really tough upbringing. They talked about not only his home life, but also his school life and the bullying that he experienced. They claimed that as a result from that, he suffered from a mental illness that could be, quote, categorized as a rage disorder, end quote. They argued that he could not be held criminally responsible for his actions. The prosecution, on the other hand, was saying this is a kid that, although young, was more than capable of understanding right from wrong. He understood that what he was doing was wrong. He did it anyway, and for that, he should be held fully responsible for his actions against the law. In 1994, Eric Smith was found guilty, and he was sentenced to 9 years to life in prison. It was ordered that he would serve his time in a juvenile detention facility until he turned 21 years old, and then he would be transferred into an adult prison. Years later, later, at 24 years old, Eric did an interview, and in that interview, he showed the same lack of remorse that he always had, but also agreed that if he had not been caught, he probably likely would have done the same thing again. He was denied parole 10 times, but on the 11th, after serving 20 years in prison at 41 years old, Eric Smith was granted parole and he was released. He was released in February of 2022. And in April of this year, April 16th of 2025, Eric Smith was discharged from parole supervision. Derek Roby will always be remembered as a little boy whose innocence touched a nation and whose life was taken away way too soon, breaking many, many people's hearts. His family continues to keep his memory alive, and they will miss him every single day for the rest of their days on this earth. A statue of Derek was made, and it stands on a hill overlooking the park that was built in his memory. The little plaque on it says, "Dedicated to be a gentle reminder of what childhood is meant to be. Derek J. Roby." Awful, awful story. It makes me want to throw up. But that is all I have for today's video. Thank you guys, if you made it to the end, for hanging out with me and for listening to Derek's story. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.